presentation will be delivered by Ted Brown, who is a senior food scientist for Cargill Food Safety and Scientific Services. Mr. Brown's presentation is titled Evaluation of Egg Wash Sanitizers to Reduce Salmonella Contamination on and in Turkey Eggs.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today. This project was in conjunction with the USPOULTRY and Cargill. As she stated, our trial was to evaluate hatch eggs and looking at different sanitizers for the reduction of salmonella. So salmonella is still the #1 issue in poultry. It's an economic burden to the poultry industry, as well as being a food safety concern. So most recently, there's been outbreaks associated with salmonella. These outbreaks have been linked back to multiple slaughter operations. But anyways, so they're coming back to the slaughter operations, and because there's multiple slaughter operations that are being linked to, it's showing that these are linked back to the sharing an egg source. And through, so some of the hatch eggs that we're seeing, we're also seeing those on salmonella on those eggs prior to after sanitation. So the current process for hatch egg sanitation is chlorine. Challenges with chlorine, it disassociates in an organic load fairly quickly. It's very corrosive to the equipment, costing R&M to process. So salmonella is frequently found on hatch eggs even after it goes through the sanitation process. All right. So current process is chlorine for most hatch eggs. Challenges again is it's very corrosive to the equipment. It disassociates very quickly, and we can even the effective levels are hard to manage just due to the equipment and the organic load. All right, so the objective of our trials was to find a more effective sanitizer for treating hatch eggs. The second part of that was, can we find a sanitizer that's effective at treating hatch eggs without damaging the cuticle level or layer and hindering hatchability rates? There's been some prior work done to this. Some in 2013, 2019, 2021. Those looked at PAA as well as some peroxide products. Prior research done by the USPOULTRY also looked at some other things like quaternary ammonia, CPC, TSP, sodium carbonate, and hydrochloric acid, or sodium hypochlorite. Only the USPOULTRY research looked at the hatchability rate. None of the other trials did. So there's where the gap was, and we decided we needed to look at some of these other antimicrobials to see if they affect hatchability rates and have better effective levels than chlorine. So our trial design was based very similar to the USPOULTRY 1996 research. So we used a commercial grade washer. We put the treatments into that washer. Our water temperature was between 104 and 120 degrees. We inoculated the eggs at a 10 to the 7th level using a fecal slurry. We put those eggs in that slurry for 1 minute and then pulled them out and held them for 30 minutes for attachment time. We enumerated the differences between the control egg, a log CFU of salmonella, and total plate counts. And of course, we did this trial in a laboratory setting because it was an inoculated trial. we had 30 eggs per treatment, 2 reps of 15. So we already went through the attachment portion of it. So, right. So the second portion of this was the cuticle damage portion of it. And how do we measure that? So we did 2 different methodologies to see whether or not we were damaging the cuticle. One, we treated the eggs, then we sanitized or sterilized the surface by putting them in a boiling water bath. We aseptically cracked open the egg and tested the actual egg itself for the presence of salmonella and APC counts using standard plate methodologies. Then secondly, we treated the eggs and put them in a blue lake dye, making blue eggs, of course. And then we cracked those open and counted the number of spots on the inside of that eggshell to determine the penetration of it. So our treatments, we use quaternary ammonia at 700 ppm, chlorine at 380 to 430 ppm. We use the thymol product, which was an undiluted product. We use peroxide, which is a 2-part solution that they provide, and then we diluted that after we mixed those part A and B together to a 1:10 dilution. And then we use PAA at a 405 ppm to a 420 ppm. And finally, we looked at bromine at a 375 ppm. All right, so here's the results. So if we look at the reductions of total plate counts, we see that we're from the unwashed treated samples, we saw a 2-log reduction to up to a 4-log reduction. And the PAA, peroxide, and quaternary ammonia were the most effective at reducing total plate counts on the surface of the egg. If we look at the salmonella reductions, we saw over a 3-log reduction with all the treatments that we tested in this trial. And there was only thymol was the only one that was significantly different in those reductions. Now, if we look at the presence of salmonella on that surface of the egg, actually getting down to the detection limit here using that egg rinse that we did, the peroxide product was by far the most effective at reducing salmonella on the surface of that egg, reducing salmonella over 70%, followed by chlorine, PAA, and the quaternary ammonia. So we look a little bit closer at that results of the prevalence of salmonella on the surface of the egg and look at the statistics. Only thymol was the only one that was not significantly different than the control product. All the other products were significantly different than the unwashed eggs. Now, if we compare that to what the industry is doing today and the chlorine product which they're using today, only thymol and the peroxide product were significantly different than what is currently practiced today. Meaning that the bromine and the PAA and the quaternary ammonia are just as effective as the chlorine that's being used today. So taking a look a little bit closer at those results, all the treatments reduced salmonella on the surface of the egg by over 3 logs. The peroxide product was the most effective at reducing salmonella on the surface of the egg by over 70%. PAA, peroxide, quaternary ammonia were the most effective at reducing total plate counts on the surface of the egg. The quaternary ammonia, PAA, and the bromine were just as effective as the chlorine as treating hatch eggs. And thymol was the least effective at all of these and was significantly worse reductions than the chlorine. So now let's get into the cuticle damage and whether or not this is affecting the hatchability of those eggs. So this is where we plated the actual internal of the egg after we sanitized it. At day 1 for total plate counts as well as salmonella, we got no log CFUs, so all below detectable limits. After 21 days of storage, we did see some recoverable APC counts ranging from around 2 logs. However, there was no significant difference in any of those counts from the control. So, looking at the prevalence of that data, on day 1, it ranged from 13% up to 33% positive on the internal of that egg for salmonella, showing that we did have salmonella in those eggs on day 1. So, and at 21 days, we did see some variation, but there was no differences in the rates of salmonella from a day 1 to day 21 days of age. So, taking a little closer look at those results of the cuticle damage, there was no differences observed in the presence of salmonella at day 1 versus 21 days. Salmonella, so looking at that data as we looked at it, there was very little difference between the day 21 versus 21, day 1 versus 21 in any of the treatments, indicating that we had salmonella present in the eggs at day 1 or before we inoculated any of the eggs. So we took from that saying, and coupled with the blue leg dye trial, that we showed that we had very few eggs, only 9 eggs, that we actually were able to count the blue dots on the inside of the eggs. And of those 9 eggs, only 1 or 2 dots actually came through there. So it indicated that we showed no cuticle damage, and due to the fact that we had salmonella at day 1, and there was no difference between day 1 versus day 21, it gave us the conclusion that we had no cuticle damage on those samples. So for next steps, we want to be sure of that because we sure don't want to hurt hatchability rates. So we need to do a true study and do a real in-facility trial to ensure hatchability rates are not affected. The thiamol, quaternary ammonia, and the peroxide products all foamed when we did this, and it probably will create some issues in processing. So we need to look at a defoaming agent to add to those products before we'd do any additional work. So in summary, all the products that we looked at reduced the levels of greater than 3 logs in all the treatments that we looked at. The peroxide product was the most effective product that we had. The quaternary ammonia, PAA, and bromine were all just as effective as chlorine, and they're way less corrosive than chlorine, so it is a viable option to switch away from chlorine. So, and then the sanitizers that we looked at this trial did not affect the cuticle layer as we saw in these methods that we looked at. And that is all I have, and thank you guys for your time, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
All right. All right, do we have any questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.